And good morning. How's everybody doing today? It's Dr. Roddenberry coming to you live from Willow Springs, North Carolina, where nothing exciting ever happens. Good morning, Marwa. Good morning, John. Good morning. Good morning. John, is Rosemary with us today, or is she busy again? I am so sorry that my morning times don't work for her because I know she'd probably be interested enough to actually come to them. So it's kind of a bummer to me. Oh, yes. Rosemary is here. How you doing? Good morning. Thanks for coming today. That is awesome. I'm so glad you made it. Hold on, let me get here and boot up my thing to see what we got going on here. Okay, fantastic. Cool. Well, I am so glad you do, and I'm glad you're having a good time, and I'm glad she is there. Fantastic. Okay. Cool. So let's go ahead and get on with it this morning. All right. So let's see. Right here. Let me go to it. All right. And let's go ahead and go to the review sheet. You should be seeing it pop up in your box right in your window right now. I'm now on that website. I'm running a couple second delay here today. I'm not sure exactly why, so I don't know. Yep, okay, fantastic. It is showing. All right, good deal. So, chapter 2 covers exam 2 covers chapters 5, chapter 6, chapter 7, and chapter 8. 50 questions, 60-minute time limit, just like last time. We're going to have multiple choice questions, true false questions, a couple of ordering questions, and some what I call multiple select questions. A multiple select question is one of those questions where I say select all of the correct answers, and you have to select, you can select one or more than one answers. So that's what I mean when I say multiple select. Okay, I didn't know exactly what the proper term for that is. But let's go ahead and go. Chapter 5 is going to be 13 questions, 7 multiple choice, 4 true false, 2 ordering, and 2 multiple select questions. You know, I wound up using a lot of true false questions on this exam. I hope that's not a bad thing. I do have a question, just a general idea of Piaget's 4 stages. Think about some sort of ordering question there. There's one question on what assimilation and accommodation are. If you'll remember, I suggested to you that Piaget thought that we built these things called schemes, which were knowledge structures, and we changed them or learned where to use them based on these 2 processes. Now, if you learn if you learn that sucking a bottle is good, and you start using this sucking schema, and you start trying to find places where sucking also works, like your thumb, that's pretty good. Sucking on this new toy feels pretty good. What are you doing with that schema? Are you accommodating that schema or assimilating that schema? Can anybody tell me? Okay, and I'll wait for it in the chat bar here. Does anybody know? Loaded questions. You are assimilating. You are assimilating that schema. And accommodation is like when your child learns that a doggy is a 4-legged furry thing, and then they call a cat a doggy, and you tell them that they're wrong, that a doggy says woof woof and the cat goes meow, and so they change their schema. They are accommodating that schema. So I'm going to want you to know that as well. Now, I do have one question where I ask you about preoperational children, because that to me is the most interesting age group. It's these kids from 2 to 5, like what we're talking about with early childhood this week. What logical abilities do they have, and what inabilities do they have at this age? Now, if you remember, we talked about the criticisms of Piaget. He was too conservative. He used case studies, and he wasn't very specific in the actual abilities he thought developed. I have one question on the criticisms of Piaget. Okay, now I then had after we talked about Piaget, so it looks like there's 4 questions on Piaget. One question about the stages, one question about assimilation and accommodation, one question about how preoperational children are different from sensory motor children, and one question on the criticisms of Piaget. So the first half of chapter 5 is going to be first third is going to be about Piaget. Then, if you remember that second day, the second half of chapter 5A, PowerPoint 5A, I talked about modern cognitive research. And so we talked about research suggesting that object permanence comes a little bit earlier. Well, exactly what age did they suggest it comes there? What exactly is joint attention, and when does joint attention emerge? What about logical abilities? There's a little section on your slide where I talk about general logical abilities. And the point being is that most of these abilities came long before the 2-year age that Piaget would have said they would even start emerging. Children are already demonstrating that. And then there was a question about imitation. Children imitate behaviors almost immediately after birth. But then there's this guy, Andrew Meltzoff, who wanted to know how long can a child remember a behavior that they imitated. Now, according to Piaget, a sensory motor child shouldn't be able to have any memory at all because they don't have mental representations, according to Piaget. But this guy, Meltzoff, showed that children can defer imitation for different periods of time, starting at the age of 4 or 5 months. So I have 4 questions where I want you to know about object permanence, joint attention, logical abilities, and imitation. So go into your PowerPoints and find the main point that was made in each of those 4 studies. Okay, oh my goodness, typo, Roddenberry typo. Boom, 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 boom. Let's see. Okay, so I do have a question. I want you to know that the language acquisition device, it isn't anything in particular. It is instead a tendency, a unique ability to automatically inherit a language. It's called your language acquisition device. Not a real thing. Keep that in mind. Not a real thing. Only a tendency, an automatic tendency of humans to adapt a language. So somebody said, wow, there must be some sort of system in there ready to acquire a language. Okay, I do want you to know about language critical periods. Remember, we talked about learning the sounds of language as having a critical period during the first year. And then we talked about being able to learn language at all as having a critical period. And then there are 2 questions in PowerPoint 5B. I talked about, there's one slide at the back of PowerPoint 5B, tips for helping your child learn language. Remember, have conversations with them, carry them around, narrate the things that you're doing, pointing at different things, use joint attention. Remember, look at things and point at things, talk more slowly, be repetitive. So what I want you to do is I want you to know these good tips that you would use to help your children learn language as well. So I do want you to learn these. And then we talked about language milestones. First word at 13 months, vocabulary explosion second half of the second year, 2-word sentences, starting around 2 years of age. And then let's see, now we're talking, this is, what are we in? We are in, this is infancy, yeah. So you're going to want to know that. So your basic milestones for language in infancy. All right. Now, here's the deal. Eric Erickson. Eric Erickson is really weird in this textbook. One of the ways that you can present Eric Erickson is you can break out his theory of personality development. He has a theory of identity development. Okay. And he argues that your identity develops over the course of your lifespan, and that at 8 different times during your life, 7 different times, excuse me, 7 different times, you have to learn important life lessons. All right. Now, in a personality class, what they do is they talk about Eric Erickson and they present him all the way from beginning to end. And it kind of makes sense. You can see the continuity of the theory. One of the things they do in this textbook is they introduced him in chapter 1, and then they're going to give him to you piecemeal over the course of this semester. And that's not really, in my opinion, an optimal way to talk about this guy. It's better when you talk about him sort of together in multiple, in his entirety. So what I've got is in chapter 6 and 8, we revisit him. We talk about him in chapter 6 and we talk about him in chapter 8. So what I want you to see here is that I've got 4 questions on Erickson. Now, in chapter 6 through 8, we covered the first 3 stages of personality development. I talked about what a crisis was, what a virtue was, and what each of the first 3 crises was. Now, remember, a crisis is not a bad thing. He just used that word to talk about it as if it were a crossroads. Crisis, think of it as a psychosocial task, if you will, a lesson you have to learn. And if you learn that lesson, you develop a personality strength, a good quality of personality. Now, he used the word virtue. Don't think of it as something moral as much as it is a personality strength. So really, his language, crises and virtues, are a little bit odd. What he's talking about is life lessons and personality strengths. So I want you to know, generally speaking, what a crisis and a virtue is. All right. And then we talked about the first 3 stages. We talked about trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, and initiative versus guilt, the first 3 stages. And with each of these 3 stages, you could develop a virtue. So what I want you to know for these is I'm going to give you 2 questions. One asks you to identify one of the first 3 crises, and one question is identify one of the first 3 personality virtues. Okay, I hope that makes sense. I feel like I confused myself, but what I want you to do is I want you to think about Erickson in chunks if you can. So basically, these first 3 stages represent, if you will, the foundations of a concrete personality, having a sense of hope, having a sense of purpose, having a sense of will. So these 3 virtues are very important in terms of building a person. So before you can start building an identity, thinking about yourself as a social person, you have to build these rock hard foundational skills. You have to be the kind of person that has trust in the world, that has a sense of hope that the world is going to work out all right. Then you have to have a sense of willpower, a sense of I have my own internal strength, right? Okay. And then you need to have a sense of purpose. You need to be willing to head off in a direction. And so these are sort of the first three personality virtues that you develop with these three crises. So what I want you to do is to look at Erik Erikson in sort of this whole context. All right. So I do have 4 questions on Erikson. Now Erikson's in chapter 6, so these are the 10 questions not from chapter 6. Okay. So I want you to know the difference between non-conscious and self-conscious emotions. That's a big change that occurs when you move from infancy to early childhood. So if you don't have a sense of self, you can't have a self-conscious emotion like guilt or shame or pride. The question is, when do self-conscious emotions arise in the infant? And you're going to look in chapter 6, and I'd like for you to know at what age self-conscious emotions seem to be observed. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. Exactly. That's the second one. The first 3 are listed twice, but the second one has a different one. In the slide, the first 3 are listed twice. All right, I'll go back and look at the slides. I may have made a mistake. Let me see what you're talking about quickly. Hold on, folks. John's asking a really good question. So let me go back. I can quickly see it. Let's see. Can you tell me what slide it is, John? Slide, it'll be 6B. Which slides are you talking about? When you reference the first one, do you mean the first time I mentioned it in chapter is it's in chapter 1, but you're probably talking about chapter 6A. Let's see. Autonomy versus shame and doubt, trust versus mistrust. So I talked about in chapter 6, slide 3, I talked about the first 2, right? Okay. And then when I went to, so you see that, correct? You see right here, I talked about trust and mistrust and autonomy versus shame and doubt. I should have then talked about initiative versus guilt. 6B. Okay. Oh, hold on, let me see. 6B. Home, open, browse. 6B. 6B. I don't remember mentioning it in 6Bs. No, it's not 6B, brother. Bobby. Yeah, I don't remember mentioning it. Okay, now. Okay, right here. Okay, yes. So I mentioned it there. And then in 8B, let's see, browse. Or is it 8A? I'll bet you it's 8A. 8A. Initiative versus guilt. Yeah, so then I talk about it right here. All right. So I want you to be familiar with what a crisis is in general, what a virtue is in general, and then I'm going to ask you 2 questions where you either tell me what the task is or what the virtue is. And the thing is, you can use the age as sort of a clue. So the infant is learning to trust the world. The 18-month-old is learning a sense of autonomy, and the 3-year-old is learning a sense of initiative. So think about what those words mean and how they relate. So it's only 8A. Yeah, it's 6A and 8A are what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm sorry. I think it's important that we go over this for everybody just to make sure that I've got it right. Okay, so let's see. There are two questions about infant communication. I want you to know general concept. Does crying communicate any information? And when does a social smile appear? Okay. I have a general question about Harry Harlow's infant attachment study. Just one overview kind of question, so don't think about the details. Just think about what the implications of the study were. I wanted you to know about the general attachment milestone behaviors. What we expect for children who are going through normal attachment is that they're going to show some degree of stranger anxiety and some degree of separation anxiety. It's just a normal part of becoming attached to your parent. So your kids are going to act a little weird during the second half of their second year. Those are typical attachment milestone behaviors. There's a general attachment question. What purpose does it serve? Then there's a question about temperament. Remember, children are not built with the cognitive capacity to have a mature personality. You don't even have a sense of self yet. You don't have a memory yet. You don't have all of these things that go into giving you a full personality. What, in fact, are you left with? Well, we typically think the origins of personality start out as these things called temperaments. Okay, do you see where it says temperament here? And temperament is just basic differences that we can notice among children during the first days of their life. All right, and so I want you to know what this temperament is and why we care about temperament, because we think that temperament can predict later outcomes of the child. And in the book, actually, in the lecture, I went through several different models of early. Actually, no, we're going to talk about that in chapter 8. So I'll go back. But I do want you to know this idea that we're born with just a reactiveness to the environment and a desire for stimulation. So we have these two different kinds of dimensions of personality. So we all have some degree of interest in novels, stimulation, and some degree in emotional instability. That appears to be what we're born with. That's our temperament. Now that's going to evolve as we develop our intellectual abilities, our memory, our sense of self. We're going to develop all of these self-aware emotions like jealousy and guilt and pride and shame. And then that's going to, at some point, evolve into what we think of as the mature adult personality. And we'll talk about that later in the semester. But it all starts with temperament. So the point being is what you should start seeing over the semester is how this sense of self evolves, how the sense of personality evolves, how intellectual abilities evolve. And what I'm hoping you see is that there are characteristic differences between children's abilities, interests, and complexity of their functioning as they move through these different age groups. There are two questions about the patterns of daycare usage in U.S. There was a chart that I went over, and there are 4 bulleted points. I have one question from those bulleted points, just a general question about patterns of daycare usage in the U.S. Let's see, Chapter 7. So we were talking about early childhood. We moved from infancy now to early childhood. In Chapter 7 is about physical and cognitive development in early childhood. 12 questions. 10 of those questions are multiple choice and 9 are true, false. That's another typo. Goodness me. All right, so general question. Can anybody tell me what is the most common cause of death in early childhood? Can anybody tell me? Can anybody tell me what's the most common cause of death? Can you tell me from the age of 2 to 5, who is bigger, boys or girls in general? Can anybody tell me that? Can anybody tell me that? What's the most common cause of death in from the age of 2 to 5? Anybody? Anybody? And who is bigger during this age from 2 to 5, boys or girls? Accidents. Very good, Rosemarie. Fantastic. Okay, everybody, I want everybody to know that. Fantastic. And who's bigger at this age? Okay, for some reason, they're flagging boys, so I'm having to accept them. Yes, absolutely. Now, here's the crazy thing. Girls start puberty a little bit earlier. So that's going to change and switch around when we get to middle childhood next week. When we start talking about middle childhood and we go through physical development, girls are going to get their little growth spurt starting a little bit earlier than boys. So in middle school, it's going to turn around and the girls are going to be a little bit bigger. But the boys are bigger during this age. Fantastic. What's the most commonly devoured vegetable in the U.S.? Okay. I want you to talk about how language is developing during early childhood. Now, your language abilities and for over the first 2 years are pretty rudimentary, right? So you're learning your first words. You have a little vocabulary explosion, and you now can begin to put together words to form thoughts. Now, what's going to happen from 2 to 5? And we talked a little bit about pragmatics, the give and take of conversation. We talked about conversational abilities developing, and children even being able to understand that they had to adjust their language when speaking to a younger child. So I do want you to know a little bit about the language development during early childhood. There's a slide on language development. Now, I gave you also, Piaget was very interested in children's logical reasoning abilities in early childhood. He had conservation tasks. He had the 3-mountain egocentrism task. He asked the children to engage in seriation and classification tasks. These were all logical tasks that he said children had difficulty with from 2 to 5 years, when he said children were symbolic but not logical. What I want you to know is I want you to be able to tell me, know the difference in these 4 tasks. So the conservation task, an egocentrism 3-mountain task, seriation, and classification. I've described those in your PowerPoint in Chapter 7. Just be able to tell me which example I am describing for you. I'm actually thinking about the question right now. I gave you a little paragraph description of what I was talking about, and you have to tell me what we're talking about, okay? I do want you to know the purpose of Head Start. Remember, we talked about stimulation during critical periods as being an important part of development. And one of the things that we need to stimulate during early childhood is our kids' thinking abilities. We need to be conversing with them. We need to be talking about interesting things with them. These kids need to be exploring and learning all kinds of different things. But a lot of children don't get that kind of stimulation. They may grow up in families that have financial troubles and other kinds of troubles that make it difficult for these parents to be the kind of stimulating environment that their children need. Head Start was developed in 1965 to overcome this problem and to help these children during this very important critical period. All right. Now, I did contrast Piaget with a guy named Vygotsky. Remember, I suggested to you that Vygotsky was more interested in the social aspect of learning. In 2 concepts from Vygotsky, I want you to know scaffolding, and the zone of proximal development. Know what both of those words mean. All right. And then I want you to know I talked about the cognitive changes in early childhood. What's happening to kids' short-term memories? What's happening to their long-term memories? What's happening to their ability to pay attention? Those are the three things we're interested in: their ability to pay attention, the size of their short-term memory, and the size of their long-term memory. I have a section on cognitive. All right. And then I want you to know what is meant by the term theory of mind. Theory of mind is that abstract understanding that we all have about how minds work. I understand that there are things I know that you don't know. I understand that there are things that you know that I don't know. This is because I understand that we each have separate minds with separate thoughts and separate bits of knowledge. There are some things, things you think that are wrong that I know about. My ability to understand this is known as the theory of mind. And it turns out that children during this age are just now developing a theory of mind. That's chapter 7. Do we have any questions about chapter 7? Okay, that's physical and cognitive development. So with physical, I talked about the causes of death, the growth patterns, gross and fine motor development, what's the difference, which one develops first, nutrition in the U.S. Those are all physical characteristics of, those are physical, and then characteristics of language, Piaget, Head Start, Vygotsky, cognitive change, and defining a mind are all cognitive development questions. So that's what I want you to know for chapter 7. Chapter 8 is going to have a little bit of Erikson. I already mentioned Erikson. And then it's going to have 11 questions related to socio-emotional development in early childhood from 2 to 5. All right. Now, I do want you to know how children describe themselves from 2 to 5. When we get to next week and we start, or let's see, 2 weeks, when we get to week 10, we're going to talk about how children's self-description changes from 5 to 8. So if you ask a 2-year-old to describe themselves, they're going to have a very interesting and limited way of talking about their abilities. And they're going to show some limitations, cognitive limitations. When we compare them in 2 weeks with children in 5 to 11, we're going to see that our self-descriptions become much more complex. So I want you to know just a couple of general descriptions on how children describe themselves during early childhood. There's a couple questions. I want you to know when children develop their sense of gender identity. And I don't want to get into an argument about what gender identities children should be developing or what's right or natural, etc., etc. But as a general rule, when do generally children know what gender they are? Now, we talked a little bit about Baumrein's model of parenting. I talked about control and acceptance. So we talked a lot about Baumrein's model, and I talked about the 2 dimensions of good parenting, right? Responsiveness and control. Those are the 2 dimensions, right? I want you to know those 2 dimensions of parenting. So this lady, Diana Baumrein, says the great parent is both responsive to their children, but at the same time institutes strong expectations and control. Those are the 2 dimensions. Now, we then suggested that not every parent has all of those 2 qualities. Some parents have the control, but no responsiveness to their children. Some people are responsive to their children, but have no control. Remember, we talked about 4 different parenting styles. So I have one question where I give you a description and you tell me which of the 4 parenting styles it is. And then we talked about cultural differences in parenting styles. So is the authoritarian parenting style always a bad parenting style? So I have 3 questions. One on the dimensions, one on an example of the 4 types, and 1 question where I want you to know how culturally homogeneous these findings related to parenting styles are. There's 2 questions on emotional control, what it involves, how you can, I think it's how you can help your child develop emotional control, and what are the negative impacts of not having emotional control. Remember, everything we're trying to learn about children at these ages is with an attempt to figure out how this is going to affect them later in life. That allows us to work on qualities that decrease your well-being later in life. So we want to know a little bit about emotional control, how you can help your child develop it, and what outcomes are associated with good emotional control. Again, there's a slide about working families. With some bulleted points, I selected one of those bulleted points and had a general knowledge question about that. We talked about co-parenting. What exactly are the qualities of good co-parenting? Now, here's the thing. You don't have to just be divorced to be a bad co-parent. There are some parents that are in relatively happy marriages that still don't co-parent. What are some of the qualities that that create good co-parenting? Now, some of them, like coordination, is easier when you're married than when you're divorced. It's easier to get the kids to and from school, to and from doctor's appointments, etc., etc. But you can still be a bad co-parent even if you are married. But we talked about co-parenting within the context of divorce because usually that's where co-parenting becomes an issue. I have one general question on whether or not divorce is good or bad. And then I suggested on one of those slides that not all children respond to divorces with negative outcomes, and what are the qualities of children that are associated with positive outcomes. So one is about whether or not outcomes are better or worse with divorce. And the other question is which qualities of children are protective against these negative outcomes. Okay. You know, I don't see anybody on the screen, so I don't know. I can't tell if I'm making any sense at all or if I'm sounding like a blithering idiot, whether or not I've lost your attention. Do you have any questions about what I've described? I tried to be as specific as possible about the things you need to look for. If you have any questions, which slide I think you would best find that information on and what part of the textbook, I can direct you to that right here and right now. I do hope you do well on this exam. Are there any slides or directions that I can give you? Oh, haha. All right, boom. Yeah, humor doesn't come through well in a chat box either, John. You got to throw me a smiley emoji, some kind of sardonic, quip-looking emoji. Okay, right. I updated your attendance from this past 2 weeks to include your extra credit or your half credit or your full credit, whatever the case may be. Go look at your attendance grades to make sure that they are correct. Don't forget, you have a homework due tonight at 11:59 p.m. Those people who have turned homework in have already had their homeworks graded with their final homework grades. Ha ha ha. Ooh, that's a good emoji. I like that one, John. That's a different one. 9 true and false instead of multiple. No, I didn't say 9 true. 9 true and false, chapter 7. Chapter 7. Chapter 7 has 10 multiple choice, 2 true and false. 10 multiple choice, 2 true and false. 10 multiple choice true and false. That's a great question. It's a great question. Okay, after we finish this exam, we will officially be halfway through with this class. And I'd like to say, ooh, snark comes through well on in the chat bar there, John. That's funny. So, I just want you to know that we've made it halfway through. Nobody is in danger at this point. Just keep doing your homework, keep doing your exams and turning in your discussion boards. And I think everybody is going to be pleased with their grades this semester. Oh, and you're only as old as your psych teacher says you are, John. And I'm going to go ahead and make the ruling here. You are ancient. Ooh. Oh, y'all are hilarious. You're not great with true and false questions. Okay. I wasn't sure. I thought they might actually be easier. I'd be interested in your feedback after the exam, what you thought about those questions, whether or not they seem straightforward or whether or not they make you confused. All right, folks, listen, take care. It's great seeing everybody today. John, Rosemary, you can continue the bantering after the broadcast. Sounds like it's going to be an interesting morning at the Barris household, right? Absolutely. Things are going to get fun from here. Hey, you folks have a great week. I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday in lecture where we're going to start talking about middle and late childhood. We're going to talk about that time before puberty. Okay, folks, y'all take care. Have a great day, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye.